This is not something that a decent human being could do.
Meghan Markle may have thought one carefully worded legal warning would finally shut this controversy down, but if the whispers now swirling behind the scenes are even remotely accurate, that move may have done the exact opposite, because Martha Stewart allegedly did not retreat, did not panic, and certainly did not apologize. Instead, she reportedly fired back with a message so cold, so dismissive, and so brutally confident that what began as a few cutting comments about Meghan's lifestyle ambitions is suddenly being whispered about as a full-blown celebrity power struggle, with lawyers supposedly hovering in the background and neither woman apparently willing to blink first. And here is where this gets incredibly messy. It's because Martha Stewart is not some nervous newcomer who disappears the second somebody mentions attorneys. This is a woman who has survived decades of ruthless headlines, public humiliation, business warfare, prison, reinvention, and criticism from practically every direction imaginable. So the idea that a warning from Meghan's camp would suddenly terrify her into silence, that was always going to be a dangerous gamble. This entire drama started because Martha did something Meghan's critics believe almost nobody in celebrity circles is willing to do anymore. She spoke casually, confidently, and without appearing particularly impressed by the carefully polished image surrounding Meghan's attempt to enter the lifestyle world. Martha's original comments were not delivered like some screaming attack, which arguably made them sting even more, because when she discussed the strange journey from actress to princess to television homemaking personality, she essentially questioned whether the progression made sense. And suddenly, the woman trying to build a lifestyle empire found herself being publicly assessed by the woman, who practically wrote the modern blueprint for one. There was no dramatic shouting match, no public confrontation, no obvious insult that could easily be dismissed as jealousy. There was simply Martha sounding unconvinced, and sometimes that is far more damaging than open hostility. And that was supposedly where Meghan's frustration began simmering, because the criticism landed at the worst possible moment. Meghan has been trying to reshape the conversation around herself, moving away from endless royal feuds and toward business, cooking, entertaining, products, domestic branding, and the carefully curated image of someone who wants audiences to see her as more than a former working royal. But when Martha Stewart publicly raises questions about whether that transition feels authentic, the criticism comes with an entirely different weight. Martha has spent decades selling authority in exactly that world, and according to the original controversy, she reportedly made it clear that authenticity and knowing your subject matter mattered enormously. That was not an accusation on paper, but the implication was obvious enough for critics to grab it and run. Then came the dinner party story, and this is where the situation supposedly stopped being embarrassing and started becoming genuinely dangerous for Meghan's public image. Martha allegedly recalled attending a California dinner where Meghan was also present after a UK trip, and the account that followed suggested Meghan had spoken about matters connected with that visit, including royal-related conversations. Meghan's side strongly disputed that version, insisting the discussion was nowhere near as revealing as critics claimed, and that the European trip had only been mentioned in broad, harmless terms. Suddenly, what could have remained a passing celebrity anecdote became a question of credibility. Who remembered the dinner correctly? Who was exaggerating? And why was such an enormous effort apparently being made to correct Martha publicly? That pushback already turned the story into a bigger spectacle, but the newest alleged twist takes the tension somewhere much more explosive. According to the made-up development now surrounding this updated storyline, Meghan's representatives supposedly escalated matters privately after seeing the controversy refuse to disappear, allegedly sending Martha a formal warning demanding that she stop repeating claims Meghan's camp considered inaccurate and potentially damaging. Now notice the word allegedly, because there is no verified public document proving such a warning exists in this scenario, but as a gossip development, this is exactly where the feud would transform from snark into warfare. A celebrity dispute can survive insults, it can survive shady interviews, but the second lawyers are even rumored to enter the room, everyone starts asking the same question: what exactly is somebody afraid will be said next? And Martha's alleged response: that is where things supposedly went nuclear. Instead of offering some carefully negotiated clarification, Martha is rumored in this fictionalized update to have stood by her right to describe what she remembered and to have made it clear through people around her that she had no intention of being intimidated into rewriting her own recollection. Imagine the calculation behind that response. Meghan's alleged warning would presumably be designed to contain the story, lower the temperature, and prevent new headlines, yet Martha refusing to fold would immediately create a second scandal layered directly on top of of the first. Now the conversation is no longer merely, what did Meghan say at dinner? It becomes, did Meghan actually try to silence Martha Stewart? And this is precisely why the alleged legal move would be such an enormous PR risk, because critics were already accusing Meghan's side of overreacting. In the original drama, the party host reportedly disputed Martha's version, which should theoretically have helped Meghan, but instead it gave the disagreement more oxygen, because now headlines could frame the situation as two competing versions of one private evening. Add an alleged legal warning on top of that, and suddenly Meghan's critics are practically handed a storyline on a silver platter. One casual Martha comment, one denial, one witness brought into the public argument, and now supposedly attorneys getting involved. Every attempt to close the door appears to open three more. The timing would also be disastrous because Meghan's lifestyle ambitions depend heavily on credibility. She needs audiences buying into the idea that this new era is natural, authentic, polished, and sustainable, not another temporary identity wrapped around whatever opportunity currently looks attractive. Martha's comments attacked that exact vulnerability without even needing to become vicious. She essentially raised the question that Meghan's critics have been asking for months: can somebody simply enter a highly competitive lifestyle space and expect established authority because celebrity already exists elsewhere? Meghan may have fame, connections, royal history, media attention, and instant headlines, but Martha has decades of experience attached to the category itself, which makes any fight between them deeply uneven in one crucial way. Meghan risks looking defensive, while Martha can simply look experienced. And now the question hanging over everything is no longer whether Martha roasted Meghan. That already happened in the public imagination. The question is what Martha does next if she genuinely believes someone tried to scare her into silence. Because Martha Stewart has spent an entire career proving that pressure does not necessarily make her retreat sometimes, it makes her dig in even harder. And if the alleged warning was supposed to end this feud, Meghan may be about to discover that sending it was the moment the real battle actually began. The biggest mistake in this entire mess may have been believing that pushing back harder would somehow make the story disappear, because once the response became louder than the original criticism, the controversy stopped looking like a passing celebrity disagreement and started looking like something much more revealing. The smartest move would have been silence, because the internet forgets quickly, audiences move on, and even sharp criticism usually burns itself out when nobody feeds it, but instead the rebuttals kept coming, the explanations kept multiplying, and what should have vanished suddenly became impossible to ignore. That is exactly why the alleged legal warning development now feels so explosive, because if the objective was to protect a reputation, the result may have been the complete opposite. The entire conversation is now circling around defensiveness, credibility, and why such enormous energy would supposedly be spent challenging a woman whose original remarks might otherwise have been forgotten within days. Martha Stewart did not need to create some giant spectacle to make the criticism sting. The original point was already sitting there, quietly and brutally, because the question surrounding the transition from acting to royal life and then into the lifestyle world landed directly on the biggest vulnerability in the brand. The comparison was uncomfortable precisely because Martha Stewart had spent decades building expertise in that space, while the newer lifestyle push was still trying to prove itself. That contrast became even sharper when the discussion turned toward authenticity and knowledge, because those words hit harder than an obvious insult. The implication was that success in this world required more than visibility, expensive presentation, celebrity connections, or beautifully packaged products. It required trust, expertise, consistency, and the kind of authority that cannot simply be announced into existence. And then came the question that critics refused to let go. If the dinner party account was completely wrong, why did the pushback become so aggressive? Why did a passing recollection become something that needed witnesses, statements, corrections, and now, in this fictionalized continuation, an alleged legal warning? That is where the story became far bigger than the original comment. Martha Stewart had nothing obvious to gain from turning one dinner into a prolonged public war, and that alone gave critics another reason to question why the response became so intense. The more people argued about whether the account was accurate, the more attention returned to the private conversation itself, and suddenly everyone was examining the smallest details instead of moving on. So now the entire story ends with a question that refuses to disappear. Was this simply an ordinary disagreement that became unnecessarily huge because everyone kept responding? Or did Martha Stewart hit a nerve so sensitive that every attempt to correct the record only exposed how much damage the criticism had already done? Because once authenticity becomes the issue, once credibility becomes the issue, and And once an alleged legal warning becomes part of the conversation, the story is no longer just about one cutting remark. It becomes about who controls the narrative, who the public believes, and who can survive the fallout without blinking first.